Ungrateful children often die by their own greed. The son who abandoned his father for 6 years thought he had just inherited a fortune. By the end of the funeral, he was on his knees, begging for mercy. He showed up to claim millions from a man he hadn't bothered to visit in years. He insulted the only person who cared for his dying father and demanded that I leave the funeral. He thought he was the new owner of a massive inheritance. He was wrong. What he didn't know was that the real will wasn't in the lawyer's hands. It was sitting inside an envelope in my car. And the moment that envelope was opened, his entire world collapsed. You're watching Revenge Blueprint. Subscribe now to see how a greedy son lost everything he thought was his. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 52 years old, former union electrician, local 573, 26 years. The man pointing at me across that viewing room was Ray Kowalski, my brother-in-law, or the closest word for what he was. He had driven 2.5 hours from Columbus, rented a black Escalade for the occasion, and arrived with his wife and 2 people who had met Ray Kowalski maybe twice in their lives. I had been there 4 days a week, sometimes 5, for 6 years. But if I start at the funeral, you're going to miss the part that matters. You're going to see the smirk on Derek's face and think you already understand the story. You don't. Not yet. The envelope in my car, Derek never knew it existed. The $54,000 he thought was safely hidden, gone. The lawsuit his attorney spent 3 weeks preparing, it collapsed in a parking garage on a Tuesday afternoon, not in a courtroom, and not because of anything I planned. Ray planned it. Every single piece of it. He was an 4-year-old retired steelworker who didn't talk much, never trusted banks with anything important, and once told me the most aggravating thing about me was that I never let him pay for labor. He also turned out to be the most deliberate man I have ever known. So let me take you back. Not to the funeral, back to where this actually started. Back to 1997, to a reception in an auto bay strung with white lights, to a woman named Linda, and to the loss that eventually brought 2 people together who had nothing in common except missing the same person. That's where the real story lives. Linda and I were married in 1997. She was 28. I was 27. We got married in a church in Youngstown on a Saturday in June, and the reception was at Ray's building on Market Street, in the auto bay on the ground floor, which Ray had cleaned out for the day and strung with white lights that his wife Rosa had bought at Woolworth several years before they closed. Rosa was alive then. She and Ray danced to Frank Sinatra on a portable stereo, and I watched them and thought, 25 years from now, that is going to be me and Linda. Rosa died in 2009. Breast cancer. Ray took it quietly, the way men of his generation take. Everything he went to work in the garage the next morning, came in for dinner at 6, and sat in his chair and watched the news. He did that for about 3 months. Then he started being okay again, slowly, and not all the way, but okay. Linda and I never had children. That was not a tragedy we chose to make into one. We had a life. I worked. She was a school librarian. We had a house on Elm Street with a back porch where we drank coffee in the mornings, and a garden that Linda loved more than I did. And I loved because she loved it. We drove up to Lake Erie in the summers. We argued about small things and agreed about large ones. The 14th of September 2018. Linda was 49 years old. She was standing in the school library sorting returned books at 10:15 inches the morning when a blood vessel in her brain burst without warning. A colleague found her on the floor between the stacks. By the time the ambulance got there, she was unconscious. She never woke up. She died at 11:43 p.m. in Northside Medical Center. The attending physician said it was one of the most severe aneurysms he had seen in 30 years, and that there was nothing that could have been done differently at any point. I have thought about that sentence many times over the past 6 years. Some days it helps. Some days it doesn't help at all. I was 46 when Linda died. Ray was 78. We were both, in different ways, at a total loss. Derek and Garrett came to the funeral. Derek gave a short speech at the service. He cried, visibly, for about 4 minutes. He stayed for the reception and made sure several people saw him crying. He flew back to Columbus on Monday morning. He had a presentation at work Tuesday. He called Ray once the following week and once the week after that. Then the calls got to once a month, then less. Garrett lived 2 hours away in Akron. He came to the funeral, helped carry chairs, said the right things to the right people, and disappeared into his life. He called Ray more than Derek did, which is to say he called about once every 3 weeks. He had 2 kids in school. He had a job he didn't like. He had a marriage that was being held together with routine. And I understood that. I don't hold it against Garrett the way I hold it against Derek. There is a difference between a man who is absent because he is overwhelmed and a man who is absent because he is calculating. Garrett was overwhelmed. Derek was calculating. Ray and I were not close before Linda died. We got along fine. He respected the fact that I kept my tools organized. He came to dinner on Sundays. He liked the way Linda's laughter filled a room, and I think, honestly, that was most of what he came for. After she died, the dinners stopped happening. There was no room to go fill anymore. I went to see him the first week after the funeral because I didn't know what else to do. I brought sandwiches from a deli on Poland Avenue. We sat at his kitchen table and ate and didn't say much, and then I left. I came back the following week, and the week after that. By the time November arrived, I was going on Tuesday afternoons and picking up groceries, because I had noticed the cupboards were starting to look bare. He wasn't forgetting to eat. He just wasn't going to the store. Going to the store meant driving past the church, where Rosa's funeral had been, and it also meant running into people who would ask how he was doing, and he wasn't sure what to do with either of those things. "You don't have to do this," he said the first time I showed up with bags. I said, "I know." I kept doing it. That is where we were. That is who we were to each other. I was not doing it to earn anything. I was doing it because I was 46 years old, and I had just lost the person who had been the center of my life for 21 years, and the only other person in the world who missed her exactly the same way. I missed her was sitting alone in a house on Elm Avenue, in Youngstown, eating canned soup and watching the History Channel. I was not staying for the building on Market Street. I didn't even think about the building on Market Street. Not once. Not in those years. Ray was diagnosed with congestive heart failure in 2020. Not a surprise, he had been a smoker until 1987, worked in a steel mill for 38 years, and had a diet that his cardiologist once described to me, with professional restraint, as historically aggressive. But the diagnosis was the formal declaration of something we had both been watching arrive for a while. His medications changed, then changed again. He needed cardiologist appointments, which were 40 minutes away. He needed lab work once a month. He needed someone who could read the notes from the medical team and ask the right follow-up questions. Because Ray was from a generation that treated doctors the way they treated clergy. You nodded, said thank you, and left without asking what anything meant. I started going to the appointments with him. Not because he asked. The first time, showed up at 8 a.m. and said I was driving him, and he said he was fine to drive himself, and I said he could drive himself to the next one and we were going to be late. He got in the truck. He grumbled about it for about 6 minutes, and then we talked about the Browns. For the rest of the drive, and the arrangement stuck. I learned more about congestive heart failure than I ever expected to know. I learned the names of his medications, lisinopril, furosemide, carvedilol, and what each one did, and what side effects to watch for. I learned what an ejection fraction was, and what Ray's was, and what it meant when his ankles swelled, and when to push fluids, and when to call the AAA on-call line. I'm an electrician. I was not trained for any of this. I figured it out because that is what you do when someone needs you to figure something out. Ray never talked about what those Tuesdays meant to him. That was not how he operated. What he did instead was this. He started having the coffee ready when I arrived. Not mentioned, not announced. Just on the counter when I came in. The first time it happened, I noticed it and didn't say anything. The second time I noticed it and didn't say anything. By the third time, it was simply part of how Tuesday afternoon worked at Ray Kowalski's house. Some men will not tell you they are grateful. They will simply have the coffee ready. The Tuesday grocery run became a ritual that had its own internal grammar. Same deli on Poland Avenue for his rye bread, not the packaged kind, the real kind from the back case. Same butcher on Mahoning Avenue for his pork chops. He was very specific about pork chops. I once substituted a different cut because his usual wasn't available, and he looked at it on the counter like I had brought home a piece of abstract sculpture and asked me what it was. They were out, I said. Of pork chops? Of his specific ones, yeah. He picked up the package and looked at the label. This is a loin chop. Yes. I wanted a center. Cut rib chop. I see that now. He put the package down with the resignation of a man who has learned that some things cannot be fixed and must simply be endured. He ate it. He did not complain. But when I came the following week, his specific pork chops were on the list in capital letters, underlined. I fixed the furnace in his house in January of 2022. The heat exchanger had cracked a carbon monoxide risk, the kind of thing that kills people in their sleep. I found it on a Monday night when I stopped by to drop off his prescription refills and noticed the boiler room smelled wrong. I turned off the system, called him in from the living room, and we both stood looking at it. He said, "How bad?" I said, "Bad enough. I had a replacement part sourced and installed by Wednesday morning." He watched me work the whole time, sitting on an overturned crate, not saying much. At the end, he said, "What do I owe you?" I said, "The part was $62. He got his wallet out. I said, "I'm not charging you for the labor, Ray." He said, "You're always doing that." I said, "I know." He paid for the part and put his wallet away and said, "You're the most aggravating person I deal with, and I've been in a union for 38 years. That was a compliment. I took it as one. In October of 2020, Ray fell in the bathroom at 2:00 the morning. He had gotten up to go to the bathroom, and his blood pressure had dropped when he stood, and he went down hard, against the vanity. He had his cell phone in his pocket. I had made him start keeping it there, and he called me before he called 911. I was at his house in 11 minutes. He had a bruised hip and a laceration on his cheekbone that needed 3 stitches. We were at the ER until 5 a.m. I drove home in the gray light and showered and went back because I had told him I'd bring breakfast. Derek called the following afternoon to check in. He asked if it was a bad one. I said, "Ray was okay." Derek said he was glad to hear that. He said he'd been meaning to get up there and just couldn't make it work with his schedule. He asked if there was anything he could do from Columbus. I said I'd let him know. I kept a running list, not a list of what I did. I wasn't tracking it as debt or ledger, but I kept notes the way I'd always kept notes on job sites, dates, what happened, what was decided. I had a small notebook, orange cover, that I kept in the truck's center console. I have it to this day. The habit started as practicality and became something else. Over time, I'll get to that. In 2021, I rewired the second floor of the Kowalski building. The electrical was 60 years old in spots, and the last inspector had flagged several panels. Ray had been putting it off because the quote from the contractor he'd called was $12,000. I did it myself, evenings and weekends, over 3 months. I filed the permits under my license. Passed inspection first try. Ray tried to pay me and I told him to put the money back. "You are going to pay for something if you keep this up," he said. He was annoyed in the way people get annoyed when they can't figure out how to be properly grateful. "Fine," I said. "Buy me a pierogi plate at the festival. That costs $9. Then you're getting a good deal." He laughed. He didn't laugh easily, and when he did, it was a short, rough sound, like clearing his throat. But it was a real laugh. The tenants on the upper floors, 4 rental units, all occupied, came to know me. Stopped me in the hallway when the heat acted up. I fixed what I could fix. Some things I called actual plumbers for. I handled the coordination. I kept Ray's phone calls to a minimum because crowds of calls stressed him out and he didn't like confrontation with tenants. He had been landlord and maintenance man and everything else for 40 years, and he was tired in the way. Only 40 years of a particular kind of work makes you tired. I was not trying to take anything over. I want to be clear about this. I was helping an old man manage his own building and his own life because there was no one else there to help and I was already there. The auto bay on the ground floor was leased to a mechanic named Alejandro Cruz, who went by Alex and had been for 9 years. Alex was a good tenant, paid on time, kept the space clean, fixed Ray's truck for free every time it needed something. He and Ray had a relationship that was mostly nods and exchanged weather observations. That was fine with both of them. By 2022, I was at Ray's house or at the building 4 days a week, sometimes 5. I had retired from the union in 2020, a combination of my back giving me trouble and an early retirement package that made sense at the time. I had savings, my house was paid off. I had time. I used the time for Ray. Derek called me once in 2022, March I think. He had found out from Garrett that I had been doing some work at the building and he wanted to check in. The conversation was professional and brief. He said he appreciated what I was doing. He said he had been thinking about coming up to see Ray more. He said, "Dad means a lot to all of us." I said, "Good." He'd like that. Derek said he'd see what he could do with his calendar. He came to see Ray twice that year, in June and in November. Both times I made myself scarce. It wasn't my business. In the fall of 2022, Ray was having a bad week. His fluid levels were up, the doctor had adjusted his diuretics, and he was tired and irritable in the specific way sick people get, tired and irritable when they've been managing their own deterioration for too long and they just want 1 week where nobody asks them to do anything. I was at the kitchen table with him on a Tuesday afternoon when he slid a bank statement across to me without saying anything. "Look at this," he said. I looked. It was his personal checking account. September statement. There was a Zelle transfer on the 9th for $3,200. The recipient was listed as DK Investments LLC. I looked at the October statement. Another transfer. $2,800. Same recipient. I looked at him. His face was confused, not accusatory. The confusion of a man who can no longer be certain whether he approved something or not. He had good days and less good days, and he knew that about himself, and it scared him. He wasn't sure if he had authorized these. "You don't remember setting this up?" I asked. "I don't," he said. "I've been trying to think. Maybe Derek set something up. Something investment-related. But I don't remember agreeing to it." "Did Derek have access to your account?" "He helped me set up the online banking a couple years back. I don't know if he trailed off. He rubbed his forehead. I said, "I'm going to look into it. Don't worry about it right now." I said it the way you say something when you already know what you're looking at and you're deciding how long to keep the information to yourself for someone else's sake. DK Investments LLC took me 20 minutes to trace. It was registered in Franklin County, Ohio, in 2019. The registered agent was Derek Scott Kowalski. Same address as Derek's house, in Columbus. I pulled the statements for the previous 2 years. I cross-referenced every transfer. Some months nothing. Some months 1 transfer. Some months 2. The amounts ranged from $1,400 to $4,600. Over the course of 4 years, from 2019 to the end of 2022, the total came to $54, $54,000, from a retired steelworker's savings account. I sat with that number for a while. Then I went and got my orange notebook from the truck. I wrote down every transfer, every date, every amount. I photographed every bank statement with my phone. I printed them at the library the following week and put them in a manila folder that I kept in the filing cabinet in my home office. I did not do this because I was planning legal action. I did not do it because I thought there would come a day when I would need it. I did it because I was a man who documented things. It was how I was built. I did not tell Ray what I had found. I have thought about that decision many times. I thought about it then too. I spent 2 weeks going back and forth on it. I will be honest with you about what it cost me. I am not a complicated man. I have a strong sense of what is fair and what isn't, and what Derek had done was not fair. It was not even close to fair. $54,000 from a retired steelworker's savings account, the money of a man who had worked every shift offered to him for 38 years and saved carefully and never spent on anything extravagant. Ray's television was a 2014 model. His car was 11 years old. He wore work boots from the same brand he'd worn since 1989 because he trusted the brand. He had built a small estate of modest, honest things, and Derek had been quietly bleeding it out the back door for 4 years. I wanted to walk into whatever boardroom Derek ran his sales meetings in and put the bank statements on the table in front of him, in front of his staff, and say, "Explain this." I didn't. Because explaining it to Derek was not the most important thing. The most important thing was the man sitting at a kitchen table in Youngstown who had already been through enough. Ray's heart was not strong. His cardiologist had been very clear about stress as a complicating factor, elevated cortisol, blood pressure, arrhythmia risk. Learning that his oldest son had been stealing from him for 4 years was not information. Ray's heart could be given in 2022 without consequences. That is not a figure of speech. That is a medical opinion I had received from his physician in different language during a different conversation and was now applying to this one. So I protected him from it. I closed the account. I documented everything. I waited. I have heard people since say that I should have told him, that he deserved to know, that protecting someone from the truth is its own form of disrespect. I hear that argument. I think it has merit. I just think that in that specific situation, with that specific man, in that specific health condition, I made the call that kept him alive and at peace in his own home for 2 more years, and I'm going to stand by it. What I do know is this. Ray figured it out on his own. His letter makes that clear. He didn't need me to tell him. He just needed me not to force the confrontation before he was ready to handle it in his own way. And his own way, it turned out, was the trust. It was very Ray to handle something that way. Thoroughly, quietly, in writing, with appropriate documentation and 2 independent witnesses and a sealed envelope. What I did do, I drove Ray to his bank and sat with him while we closed the account. Derek had access to and opened a new one. I told Ray it was a security precaution, which was not technically a lie. He didn't ask follow-up questions. He was too tired to argue about banking details. In March of 2023, Derek called me. His voice was controlled in the particular way voices get controlled when the person is actually very angry. I've noticed Dad's account arrangement changed, he said. It did, I said. I'd like to know why. You'd want to ask Ray about that. I'm asking you. Then you're asking the wrong person, I said. He paused. Then, you know, Marcus, you've gotten very comfortable in a situation that isn't yours. I said nothing. Dad is my father. Garrett's father. Not yours. I know whose father he is, I said. Then act like it. I let the silence sit for a few seconds. Then I said, you let me know if you need anything. For Ray. I'll be there on Tuesday. I hung up. I wrote the date and a summary of the conversation in the orange notebook. Derek did not come to see Ray for the next 6 months. Ray's health was declining faster by the spring of 2024, and he knew it with the same matter-of-fact honesty he applied to everything else. His ejection fraction, the measurement of how much blood the heart pumps out per beat, had dropped to 25%. Normal is above 55. At 25, you are doing the math in a different way. He knew. Ray Kowalski had been an honest man his entire life, and he applied that honesty to his own situation. He didn't rage about it. He didn't pretend. He had outlived his wife, watched his steel mill close, buried several friends, and dealt with the indignity of aging with the same quiet discipline he'd applied to everything else. He was not afraid of dying. He was, I think, a little afraid of what would be left undone and what would be left behind. There was a conversation we had in early March, in the car on the way home from his cardiologist appointment. The doctor had been direct that day. Not cruel, but direct. The options were narrowing. Ray had sat with it in the office and nodded and asked 2 questions, practical questions, about timelines and what to monitor, and then we had walked out to the truck, and I had driven for about 10 minutes in silence before he said, you know what I think about sometimes? No. The mill in 1974. The summer we poured the foundation for the No. 3 furnace. It was so hot in there that week you couldn't think. You just worked. There was this kid, 22 years old, first summer on the job. He passed out from the heat on the 4th day, and we carried him outside, and they laid him on the ground and poured water on him, and he came around and got back up and went back in. Ray paused. I can't remember his name now. Isn't that something? He was there the whole summer and I can't remember his name. Why are you thinking about that? I asked. Because it was the kind of work where you didn't have time to be afraid, he said. You just did the next thing. I want to do the next thing. I don't want to be afraid. I didn't say anything. Are you afraid of it? He asked. Dying. When your time comes. I haven't spent much time on it, I said. That's the right answer, he said. He looked out the window. Linda wasn't afraid either. I used to worry about that the quick ones are the ones who were brave. But I think it's more that they didn't have the chance to be afraid, which is its own kind of mercy. He didn't say anything else for the rest of the drive. I thought about that conversation for a long time afterward. I still think about it. In February, I drove him to an appointment, and on the way home he said, You've been very good to me, Marcus. I said, It's not a hardship. He looked out the window. Then he said, Linda would have liked knowing you were here. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say to that. I just drove. In March, Ray was hospitalized for 5 days after his heart went into a sustained arrhythmia that the ER team took 3 hours to stabilize. I was the one who drove him to the ER. I was the one who gave the medical team his medication list and his cardiologist's number and answered the questions about his history. I was the one who sat in the waiting room at 2 a.m. while the on-call cardiologist worked. At 4 a.m., a nurse came and told me he was stable and I could see him. Derek arrived the following afternoon. He brought a plant. He stayed for 3 hours. He was polite to me, professionally polite, the kind of polite you use with someone you've decided to be strategic about. He told Ray he was going to get things sorted, and Ray nodded and looked tired. After Derek left, Ray looked at me and said nothing. But there was something in his face that I had not seen before. Not sadness. Something more like resolution. He came home from the hospital on a Thursday. I stayed at the house for the first 2 nights, sleeping on the couch to monitor his oxygen and make sure he was steady. On the second night, around 11 p.m., I heard him moving in the kitchen. I got up. He was sitting at the table with a glass of water and a yellow legal pad. He looked up when I came in and said, "Go back to sleep." "I'm already up," I said. "I'm just writing something," he said. "Okay, sit down then, if you're going to stand there." I sat. He wrote for a while. I drank water. Neither of us said anything. The kitchen was quiet, except for the refrigerator hum and the radiator knocking, the way old radiators knock, in Ohio in March. After about 40 minutes, he set the pen down and looked at the pages and folded them once, then again, and slid them into an envelope he had on the table. I didn't ask. He didn't explain. He went back to bed. I went back to the couch. 3 weeks later, on a Monday afternoon in late April, Ray called me and asked me to come over. Not on a Tuesday, not the usual time, a Monday. I came over. He was sitting at the kitchen table. On the table was a sealed envelope with my name on it, written in Ray's handwriting, that block print style that men of his generation and profession used, each letter a deliberate small structure. He slid it across the table toward me. "Don't open that until Ann Marconi calls you," he said. Ann Marconi was his attorney. I knew her name. I had taken Ray to her office twice in the secretary, past 2 years, and waited in the lobby. "All right," I said. "You understand what I'm saying?" "Yes." He looked at me for a moment. "I know you won't." He said it simply, like it was an observed fact, not a compliment. I put the envelope in the inner pocket of my jacket. "How are you feeling today?" I asked. "About the same," he said. "You want coffee?" "Sure." He got up and made coffee. We drank it and talked about baseball for 20 minutes. Then I went home. That was the last real conversation we had. He went back to the hospital 2 days later. He declined fast. On the 9th of May 2024, at 7:22 the morning, with me in the room and a night shift nurse named Denise, whose name I will remember as long as I live, Ray Kowalski's heart stopped. He did not look frightened. He looked like a man who was done. Derek and Garrett arrived 2 hours and 18 minutes later. I had already called them when it became clear things were going that way. I had called at 6 a.m. Derek called back at 6:55 and said he would get there as soon as he could. He was in Columbus. 2.5 hours, without traffic. He arrived at 9:40. Garrett, who was closer, arrived at 9:25. By the time they got there, I had spoken with the hospital chaplain. I had arranged for the funeral home that Ray had specified in his paperwork. He had written it down himself 3 years ago and given me a copy. I had called Ann Marconi's office and left a message. When Derek walked in and saw all of this in motion, his face did something complicated. And then it straightened out. And the suit went on. And the posture went on. And Derek Kowalski began the process of becoming the next scene of this story. Ray's visitation was held 2 days later at Hennessy Funeral Home on McGuffey Road. The Guffey, same place Rosa's visitation had been. The same place Linda's had been. I had been to Hennessy 3 times now, and I knew the carpet and the lighting in the particular way. The air conditioner sounded. I arrived early. I had a small frame in my hands, a photo of Ray in his mill gear from the 1970s, standing in front of a finished structural beam, squinting into the sun. Ray had kept the photo on his desk for 40 years. I had taken it from his house with permission from nobody, because I knew he would have wanted it near the casket, and nobody else was going to think of it. The funeral director, a man named Hollis who wore a pocket square with military precision, greeted me at the door. He recognized me. I had handled some of the pre-arrangements. We shook hands. I went in and placed the photo near the flowers. Derek and Karen arrived 30 minutes later. They were not alone. Karen had brought her sister and her sister's husband, people who had met Ray twice in their lives, and now were standing in his viewing room with their hands folded at the correct angle. The rented Escalade was at the curb. Within 20 minutes, Karen had positioned herself as the point of contact for incoming guests. She was doing the hand clasping and the thank you so much for coming and redirecting any questions about arrangements to herself. I watched this happening with the same feeling you get when you see a storm front moving in from the west. You can't stop it, you just note it. Then Derek walked toward the casket and saw me standing there. I have already described what happened next. He pointed at me. He said I was not family. He said it in a voice calibrated for the room. He asked Hollis to handle it. Hollis took a step back and considered his career choices. I stood still. I looked at Derek. He had the smirk on the one he wore when he felt he was owed something and about to collect it. What he didn't know, I had been in contact with Ann Marconi that morning. She had called me. She had said the words that Ray had told me to wait for. She had said, "Marcus, whenever you're ready, come in and we'll sit down." Ray left instructions. What he also didn't know, I had the envelope in the inside pocket of the same jacket I'd been wearing for the past 3 weeks, unopened, because Ray had said to wait until Ann called, and I was a man who did what Ray told me. I did not respond to Derek. I turned and walked to the far side of the room, where a 9-year-old man in a brown sport coat and hearing aids was standing alone with a cup of bad funeral home coffee, looking at the wall of photographs near the door. Walter Brzezinski had worked alongside Ray at Bethlehem Steel for 19 years. They had been at each other's weddings, and they had buried each other's wives, and they played cribbage every other Saturday at Ray's kitchen table until Ray got too tired to sit up that long. Walter had a way of looking at situations that was very old and very clear. He saw me coming. "Hell of a suit Derek's got on," Walter said, without moving his eyes from the photographs. "Yeah," I said. Ray would have had something to say about that. He would have. Walter looked at me then. "You okay?" "Yeah." "Good." He patted my arm once, the way old men pat things. Once, firm, and then it was done. We stood there together through the whole visitation. Garrett came and found me once, near the end. He shook my hand and looked at his shoes and said, "Thank you for being here for him." I said I was glad to be there. He nodded and walked away. He looked like a man who had spent a lot of his life being approximately 3 steps behind events he couldn't control. After the service, I drove home alone. I parked in front of my house and turned the engine off. I sat there for about 40 minutes. The street was quiet. The porch light was on, which it always was on a timer. I thought about Ray at the kitchen table at 11 p.m. with the yellow legal pad. I thought about Linda in the garden in August, her hands in the dirt, complaining about the beetles. Then I got out of the truck and went inside. Ann Marconi's office was on Federal Plaza. 4th floor, corner office. The kind of office that communicates that its occupant has been doing this work long enough to have stopped trying to impress anyone. There were 4 of us at the table: Ann, me, Derek, and Garrett. Derek had brought his own attorney, a man named Phil Hedges from a Columbus firm, which meant Derek had called an attorney before his father was in the ground, which told you something precise about Ray Kowalski. Ann opened with the standard language of estates and trusts. I have sat in enough meetings in my life to know when someone is managing a room. Ann was managing the room. She went through it methodically. No unnecessary pauses, no dramatic preamble. Ray had established a revocable living trust in 2019. He had amended it in 2021 and again in 2023. Both amendments had been witnessed and notarized. A capacity assessment had been conducted in 2023 by a licensed geriatric psychologist. The assessor's written report, which Ann had copies of, noted Ray's intact executive function, clear articulation of his intentions, and specific, reasoned explanations for his distribution decisions. Ann set down the trust document. "The primary beneficiary of the trust assets," she said, "including the real property, located at 408 Market Street, Youngstown, Ohio, and all associated business assets, equipment, and lease agreements, together with the balance of the trust's operating account, is Marcus Webb." She continued, "Derek Kowalski is the beneficiary of the certificates of deposit held at First Merit Bank, currently valued at approximately $8,500. Garrett Kowalski is the beneficiary of the personal property itemized in Schedule B, including the vehicle, hand, tools, and watch collection." The room was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then Derek said, "No, not angry, not yet, just flat." As if Ann had said something factually incorrect about a minor point that needed to be corrected. "This is not right," he said. Dad was not in a position to make decisions like this. He was on multiple medications. He was confused half the time. This is classic undue. The trust was established in 2019, Anne said, cutting him off with the even tone of someone who has heard this particular sentence more times than she could count. When your father was 79, fully ambulatory, and in possession of all his faculties according to his primary physician at the time. He amended it twice, both times with independent witnesses and a recorded capacity evaluation on file. I have those documents here if you'd like to. Review them. Phil Hedges put his hand on Derek's arm. Strategic silence. He was already doing the calculus. Derek looked at me across the table. You did this, he said. You were there every day working on him, every Tuesday with the groceries and the appointments, and the hay stopped himself. He was trying to stay controlled. This is not legal. You are not family. You are my dead sister's ex-husband. We were still married when Linda died, I said. I said it quietly. I was never her ex-husband. Derek stared at me. Anne cleared her throat. There is one additional item. Your father included a written statement as an addendum to the trust, which under Ohio trust law is treated as part of the governing instrument. I'd like to read a portion of it. She read, I leave the property at 408 Market Street to Marcus Webb because he has demonstrated, over 6 years, a level of care and commitment to my welfare that my sons, whom I love, were unable to provide. This is not a judgment, this is a recognition. Marcus kept the building sound, kept my health monitored, kept me in my own home longer than I would otherwise have managed. What I owe him cannot be paid back. The building is the closest I can come. Anne set the page down. Garrett was looking at the table. His jaw was working like he was trying to decide whether to say something. Derek's attorney leaned over and whispered to him. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. I looked at Anne. I'll call you. Tomorrow, I said. She nodded. I walked out. I sat in the parking garage in my truck for 25 minutes. The envelope was in my jacket pocket. I had not opened it yet. Anne's call that morning had been the signal, but I had decided to wait until after the meeting. I didn't want to open it in a parking garage right now. I needed to be somewhere else. I drove to Market Street. I parked in front of 408. The building was quiet Tuesday. Afternoon, Alex's shop was closed. The tenants upstairs were at work. I sat there and looked at the brick facade that Ray had repointed himself in 1994 because he refused to pay someone else to do work he could do himself. Then I opened the envelope. Ray's handwriting. Block print, careful, 3.5 pages on yellow legal paper. I read it twice. I'll tell you what it said. But not yet. I folded it and put it back in the envelope, and put the envelope in the inside pocket of my jacket and drove home. Derek filed notice of intent to contest the trust 11 days later. The legal theory was undue influence. The claim that I had isolated Ray, manipulated him, in a period of vulnerability, and redirected an inheritance that should, by any reasonable reading of the natural order, have gone to Ray's biological children. Undue influence, a real legal theory with real criteria, and Derek's attorney, Phil Hedges, was not an idiot. He knew the capacity documentation was a problem. He knew the 2019 establishment date was a problem. So they needed to build a different argument. And that argument required making me look like a predator. They hired a private investigator named David Foote. I found out about this when one of my former local 573 coworkers, a foreman named Pete Gallagher, called me and said a man had come around asking about me. Professional type guy, Pete said, asking about your character. I told him you were the most reliable electrician I'd worked with in 20 years. He wrote that down and looked like that wasn't what he was hoping for. Foote eventually found what he was looking for, a DUI from 2009. I had been pulled over on Route 11 at 11:30 p.m. after my union's Christmas party. I was 37. I had made a bad decision. I paid the fine, did the court-mandated alcohol education program, lost my license for 6 months, and never drove after drinking again. I have never been arrested for anything else. I have never had a violent incident. I have never had a complaint filed against me in 26 years of licensed work. But Foote found the 2009 record and packaged it into a report for Phil Hedges. And Phil Hedges sent a letter to my mailbox with a paragraph implying that a man with a history of impaired decision-making had been placed in a position of daily access to a cognitively declining elderly man. I read the letter on my front porch. Then I went inside and called Jim Coulter. Jim Coulter was a probate litigation attorney based in Mahoning County. He had been recommended to me by two separate people who knew the local legal community. He was 47, compact and direct, and in our first meeting he asked me one question before I could finish my summary of the situation. "What else do you know about Derek Kowalski?" he said. I opened my briefcase and took out the manila folder. Jim went through the bank statements, the transfer records, the DK Investments LLC, registration, and the 4 years of monthly documentation quietly and systematically. He got to the end. He looked up. $54,000, he said. Yes. From his father's account. Yes. Jim leaned back in his chair. "Marcus," he said, "we are not just defending here." The counterfiling went through the following week. Jim filed a civil complaint against Derek Kowalski for financial exploitation of an elderly adult, a cause of action under Ohio Revised Code 2903.341, which carries both civil liability and potential criminal referral. We also filed with the Mahoning County Adult Protective Services Unit and with the Ohio Attorney General's Elder Abuse Reporting Line. It was not a bluff. Every document was real. Every transfer was documented. Derek's LLC was real, and his name was on it. And the transfers from Ray's account were real, and they had been ongoing since 2019. Phil Hedges went quiet for 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, I want to tell you what it was like to wait, because people sometimes tell these stories as if the legal part is clean and procedural, and you just sit back and let it happen. It is not like that. I received a copy of the original undue influence filing in the mail, and I read it on my front porch on a Thursday afternoon. It was 12 pages long. It described me as a non-family individual who had systematically inserted himself into the daily life of an elderly man with declining cognitive function, gradually assuming control of financial and medical decisions in a manner consistent with known patterns of elder financial exploitation. It noted that I had no biological or legal connection to the deceased and that my disproportionate inheritance was inconsistent with any prior expressed intention of the decedent. 12 pages describing who I was to Ray Kowalski and getting all of it wrong. Every sentence technically structured, but factually empty. The way you can describe a table perfectly accurately, 4 legs, flat surface, made of wood, and miss entirely the fact that it was the table a family ate dinner at for 40 years and the legs are worn down, on the left front corner from someone's heel tapping against it every day. I put the filing on the kitchen counter and did not look at it again. I called Jim Coulter the following morning and we got to work. The private investigator found the DUI within 2 weeks. Jim had warned me they would dig. They need something, and there's rarely nothing, he said. Think about whether there's anything in your past they can find that I should know about before they find it. I told him about the DUI. I told him about everything else I could think of. There was not much else. I have led what I can only call a boring life. By the standards of people who compile legal leverage, no criminal history, no financial disputes, no estranged family members making claims against me, no former employer with a grievance. The most dramatic thing in my history was a noise complaint. My neighbor filed in 2011 when I ran a generator during a power outage. That was all they found. And the DUI. The DUI letter from Phil Hedges arrived on a Wednesday. I read the paragraph connecting a 2009 drunk driving offense to alleged patterns of predatory caregiving behavior. I appreciated the creativity of the argument while recognizing it as the move of a man who knows his real case is weak and is trying to create noise. I took the letter to Jim's office that afternoon. When I set it on his desk, he read it and set it down and picked up the manila folder. "They're making noise because they know what's in here," he said. "I know," I said. "Are you ready to counter?" "Yes," I said. "Once we file the theft complaint, there's no walking it back. Derek faces civil liability and a potential criminal referral. Their calculus changes entirely after we file." "I know," I said. "All right." Jim clicked his pen. "Let's go." During those 3 weeks, Derek sent me a text message. "I think we need to talk like adults about finding a resolution here." I didn't respond. He sent another one 4 days later. "I'm not trying to make this into something it doesn't need to be." I didn't respond. Then, on a Thursday in July, I was at the Market Street building replacing a hot water heater in apartment 3B, one of Ray's tenants, a woman named Mrs. Okafor who had been there 11 years and made a particular point of thanking me for doing the work quickly. I was in the crawl space under the unit when I heard the entrance door downstairs. I came down the stairs and Derek was standing in the auto bay. He was in khakis and a polo shirt. He looked smaller than he did in the suit. He looked like a man who had been sitting with a decision for too long and finally driven 2.5 hours on a Thursday to avoid making it. He looked around at the bay, the hydraulic lift, the tool wall, the concrete floor that Alex kept immaculate. Then at me. I just want to understand how this happened, he said. He said it almost exactly the way he'd said it at the funeral. Almost the same words. Like that was his one available sentence for this situation. I looked at him. I had a pipe wrench in my hand from the hot water heater work. I set it down on the bench. Derek, I said, I've got work to do up there. You know where Anne's office is if you have something formal to discuss. I turned and went back up the stairs. He left. I heard the door. I wrote it in the orange notebook. Date, time, location, what was said. Phil Hedges reached out to Jim Coulter in early August and suggested a facilitated conversation at the property. This was a mediation move, a way to try to negotiate a settlement before the civil complaint against Derek created a criminal referral that neither side could walk back. Jim told me what it was and asked if I wanted to participate. Yes, I said. You understand this is not binding. It's information gathering. Their goal is to get you to agree to a partial settlement. Some figure. Something they can take back and call a win. I understand, I said. You don't have to say anything during this meeting. In fact, I know, I said. I'll stay quiet. I almost stayed quiet. The meeting was set for a Thursday morning, 10 a.m., in the auto bay. Alex had agreed to keep the bay closed for the morning. We set up 4 folding chairs in a rough circle near the center lift. Jim was there, Phil Hedges was there, Derek was there. Garrett had also come standing slightly behind Derek, not sitting, like a man who wasn't sure he had the right to a chair. What nobody had told Phil Hedges and what, therefore, Derek didn't know was that 2 other people would be there. Anne Marconi arrived at 9:55 inches a gray blazer, carrying a briefcase. She was not there. As Derek's attorney's colleague. She was there as the trustee's representative. As the attorney of record who had drafted the document and could testify to every step of its creation. Walter Brzezinski arrived at 9:58 inches, his brown sport coat. He drove himself, which Jim had tried to talk him out of, and Walter had overruled. I drove to the mill in blizzards for 19 years, Walter said when Jim relayed this to me. I can drive to a building I've been going to since 1981. When Derek saw Walter come through the door, something moved across his face. It was there for a fraction of a second, and then it was gone. But I saw it. Recognition. And underneath the recognition, fear. Because Walter and Ray had been close for 50 years, and Derek knew, on some level, that he did not know exactly what Ray had told Walter. Phil Hedges opened with the standard framing the family's grief, the complicated nature of end-of-life relationships, the desire to find a resolution that honored Ray's legacy. He used the word legacy 4 times in 6 minutes. Jim sat with his hands folded and let him go. Then Walter leaned forward in his chair. Can I say something? He asked. Phil Hedges blinked. Walter was not on anyone's list of participants. Please, Anne said. Walter set his cup of coffee on the concrete floor. He looked at Derek. Ray told me about the account transfers, he said, in 2022. He showed me the statements. He knew what DK Investments was. He let that sit for a moment. He didn't confront you because he said confronting you would destroy Garrett, and destroying Garrett was not something he was willing to do. That was the only reason, not because he was confused, not because he didn't understand what you were doing. Walter picked up his coffee again. He understood perfectly well. He just loved you more than you deserved. The bay was quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed. Derek's jaw moved. Phil Hedges started to say something, some procedural objection about the relevance of this testimony, and Derek held up a hand to stop him. Then Derek looked at me. And here is where I broke the commitment I had made to Jim Coulter about staying quiet. Because Derek looked at me and he said, Linda would have wanted the family to have this. She would have wanted it to go to her brothers. She would have agreed with me. He said Linda's name. He used her to make an argument. I looked at him. I had not raised my voice in this building in 6 years. I did not raise it now. I kept it exactly where it was. Linda died in the middle of a Tuesday morning reading books to children, I said. She didn't get to finish a thought she started at breakfast. She didn't get to say goodbye to anyone. She didn't get to say anything about anything. I paused. So don't tell me what Linda would have wanted. You don't know. And you don't get to use her name in here like it's a tool. I stood up. Derek, you took $54,000 from your father's account over 4 years. That documentation exists. That complaint has been filed. If you want to continue the trust contest, you can do that and we will see what the Adult Protective Services investigation turns up alongside it. Or you can go home. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. I'm going back upstairs to finish the hot water heater. I walked to the stairs. Behind me, I heard Phil Hedges say quietly to Derek, "We need to talk." I went upstairs and finished the installation. I tested the connections, checked the pressure relief valve, ran the hot water in the sink until it ran hot, and wrote the date and my initials on the unit in black marker the way I always did. Then I sat on the edge of the bathtub for a few minutes. Then I went back downstairs. Derek was gone. Garrett was still there, standing near the door, alone. He looked at me. When I came down, his eyes were red. "I didn't know about the money," he said. I nodded. "I want you to know that." I didn't know. "I believe you," I said. He nodded once and walked out. Walter was still there, sitting in his folding chair, finishing his coffee. He looked up. "You said the hot water heater thing without any drama at all," he said. "Yeah," I said. Walter smiled the short, rough kind. Ray would have appreciated that. Phil Hedges formally withdrew the trust contest notice 2 weeks later. No settlement. No negotiation. A clean withdrawal. Jim Coulter called me when the paperwork came through. He was professionally restrained, in the way that told me he was actually quite satisfied. "It's done," he said. "The property is yours, free and clear." The civil theft complaint remained filed. The Adult Protective Services investigation was completed approximately 4 months later, by which point it was an administrative matter rather than an active legal fight. I was advised by Jim that the findings referred to the county prosecutor's office. I do not know what, if anything, came from that. I was not in contact with Derek Kowalski. I was not following his circumstances. I had the building. I want to describe what happened in the building over the following months, because it matters. Alex Cruz's lease was up for renewal in September. I sat down with him in the bay over coffee, and we worked out a new 5-year arrangement. Same rate he'd been paying Ray, locked. He looked at me when I said the number and I could see him recalibrating something in his head. "You're not going to raise it?" he said. "Not right now," I said. He extended his hand and I shook it. He has since put a new hydraulic lift in on his own dime and expanded his staff to 3. The bay looks better than it has in 20 years. The 4 upstairs rental units were all occupied. I met with each tenant individually. Mrs. Okafor in 3B brought me a dish of jollof of rice to the meeting, which was the most direct negotiating tactic I had encountered in recent memory, and which worked extremely well. I kept everyone at their current rates for a year and told them I would give 90 days notice before any increase. I didn't need the income the way someone who bought an investment property needs the income. I had my pension and my savings. What I needed was to take care of the building the way Ray had asked me to, which was mostly the same as taking care of people who lived in the building, which was mostly the same as taking care of the plumbing when the plumbing broke, and the electrical when the electrical failed, and the parking lot when it iced over. I knew how to do those things. I had been doing them for years. Garrett called me in October. 6 weeks after the mediation, I answered. "I just wanted to check in," he said. There was a pause. I don't know where. I stand with you." "I don't know either," I said. "Not yet." "That's fair." "How are you doing?" I asked. "Honestly?" He blew out a breath. "Not great. Learning some things about Derek I wish I'd known sooner. About a lot of things. It's been a lot." "I know," I said. We talked for about 20 minutes. Not about the trust, not about Derek. About his kids, about a job he was thinking about leaving. At the end I said, "If you want to come up and see the building sometime, you're welcome." He said he might take me up on that. He came up in November. We had coffee at Ray's kitchen table, which was now in my garage, because I had taken it when I cleared the house, unable to leave it behind. We didn't resolve anything. There was nothing to resolve. We just sat in the same space for an hour, which was its own kind of thing. Karen sent a card in December. It said, "Wishing you well in the new year," and had her and Derek's names printed at the bottom. I put it in the kitchen drawer with the takeout menus and the instruction manual for the microwave. I never heard from Derek directly again. I did not spend any time thinking about whether Or not, he was well. I have not told you yet what was in the envelope. I have been saving it because Ray did it. He knew what he was doing when he wrote it. He knew it was the last thing, and the last things are the things you think about the most carefully. The letter was 3.5 pages, block print, careful, unhurried. Ray wrote the way. He did everything thoroughly, without decoration, getting to the point. He wrote about Linda first. He wrote about the day she was born and the way she grabbed his finger and held it and didn't let go, and the way she always ran at full speed and never understood people who moved cautiously through things, and the way she chose me, a union electrician with no particular ambitions beyond doing good work and keeping my word over men who made more money, and how that choice was the one that showed him most clearly who she was. He wrote, "She was the best of both Rosa and me, smarter than me, better tempered than Rosa. I did not deserve her as a daughter, and I knew it." He wrote about the years after she died. He was frank about it in the way he was frank about everything. He wrote, "The grief almost finished me. Not the dying kind of finished. The going through the motions kind. You kept me from that, not by doing anything spectacular. By showing up on Tuesdays with the right kind of bread from the Poland Avenue deli and not asking how I was feeling." He wrote about what he knew regarding Derek. He had known since at least 2021. He wrote, "I know what Derek did. I have known for some time. I did not stop it when I should have. Because I was tired and I was afraid of what it would mean for Garrett, who has always needed the brother that Derek has never quite managed to be. That was my failure. You protected me from the worst of it. I don't know exactly how, but I noticed the account change. I understood what it meant. I didn't ask because asking would have required me to do something about the answer. The hardest line in the letter was in the 3rd page. I am leaving you the building, because it is the only thing I have that is worth what you are worth. I am aware that is not a fair trade. I am aware that you did not do what you did for the building. That is exactly why I am leaving it to you and not someone who would." He ended with this: "Take care of the tenants. Keep Alex's rates fair. Don't let the boiler go another winter without an inspection. It's been making a sound I don't like. And when you're in the building and things are quiet, know that I was glad you were there." That is the most I know how to say. I read that last part standing in the parking lot on Market Street on a Tuesday in May. The street was empty. The sign above Alex's bay was unlit. A pigeon was walking along the roof ridge with the absolute unearned confidence of something that has never had to justify its presence anywhere. I folded the letter and put it in my jacket pocket. Then I went upstairs and fixed a loose railing on the 2nd floor landing that I had been meaning to get to for 2 weeks. I want to tell you what I think, which is different from what I know. What I know. Ray Kowalski was a man who took his time making decisions and then made them completely. He had established that trust in 2019, 5 years before he died. He had thought about it. He had amended it. He had documented his capacity and his reasoning. He had not been confused or manipulated. He had been deliberate. What I know, Derek Kowalski had been taking money from his father's accounts since at least 2019. He was not desperate. He was not in financial trouble, as far as I could determine. He was simply a man who had decided, on some level, that his father's assets were already partly his and he was merely accelerating the timeline. I have tried to understand that logic, and I can understand it the way you understand the logic of a broken compass. I can see the internal consistency, but I can't agree with where it points. What I know, Garrett is a man who has been living in his brother's shadow long enough that he has partially become its shape. He is not a villain. He is something more complicated, and in some ways sadder, a person who knew somewhere that something was wrong and found it easier not to look at it directly. What I think the hardest thing about the situation was not the lawsuit. The lawsuit was a problem with a structure and a set of rules, and problems with structures and rules are things I know how to approach. The hardest thing was Derek standing in that viewing room on the day of Ray's funeral and telling 12 people that I was not family, and the way that sentence sat in the room for a moment as if it might be true. I am not Ray's son. I am not his blood. I was married to his daughter and she died. On purely genealogical terms, Derek's claim had a surface logic to it that was uncomfortable to stand next to. But here is what I keep coming back to. Family is not a claim you make. It is a practice. It is the Tuesday groceries and the 2 a.m. call and the 6 months of medical notes in an orange notebook in the afternoon in the hospital waiting room at 4 a.m. It is choosing to show up when you have no obligation to show up. It is what you do in the room that nobody will see and nobody will thank you for. Derek Kowalski had the biological credential. He just never used it. I want to ask you something before we close. Not a rhetorical question, an actual one. Because I've thought about this more than I have answers for. Ray knew what Derek had been doing for years and chose not to confront him. He protected Derek from consequences right up until the moment he chose, very deliberately, to stop protecting him. Was that mercy? Was it failure? Was it both? I still go back and forth on this. I think about Ray at that kitchen table at 11 p.m. writing the letter, knowing what he was doing, knowing what it would set in motion. I don't know if I would have had the clarity to do it, or the courage, or whatever the right word is for the thing that lets you, in the last weeks of your life, make a decision that is honest instead of comfortable. I think about that more than I think about anything else in this whole story. Closing. Ray's yellow hard hat from the Bethlehem steel mill is on a peg above the garage door of the Market Street building. He hung it there himself, sometime in the 1990s, after retired. It is old and faded from yellow to something more like cream, and it has a crack along the back brim that he must have put there at some point on the job site, and nobody ever replaced it or took it down. I have not taken it down. I walk past it every time I go in or out. In the winter, when the boiler inspection is due, Ray was right about the sound, for the record, and I caught it before it became a problem. I put on my work jacket and go down to the basement and do the work. Mrs. Okafor leaves something in the hallway for me on those days. Never a big thing. A plate covered in foil, a small bag with something in it. She never announces it, it's just there. Walter comes by once a month. We play cribbage on a card table I set up in the auto bay. After hours. He usually wins. He is ruthlessly indifferent to whether I think his play is fair. I am not happy in the way people mean happy when they mean everything worked out. Too much that I loved is gone for that word to fit cleanly. But I am something. Anchored, maybe, present. In the right place for reasons I can now account for. Ray wrote, "When you're in the building and things are quiet, know that I was glad you were there. I know that. The building is quiet a lot. I am glad to be here too. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been the person who showed up when no one else was watching, or if you know someone who has shared this with them, not generally, specifically, the person you're thinking of right now, and tell me in the comments, was Ray right to protect Derek as long as he did? Or did that protection cost too much? I want to read everyone.